Task 3 overview. The Task 3 rubrics are rubrics 11 through 15 for most handbooks. World Language, remember, has only 13 rubrics because the academic language rubrics are omitted. Task 3 focuses on analysis of student learning. Let's think back. In Task 1, planning, candidates planned multiple forms of assessment so that they could monitor student learning throughout the learning segment. In the learning segment, students may have had several informal assessments, some pre-assessments at the beginning of the lesson, some exit slips, some quizzes, student work, and probably a main assessment that came towards the end of the learning segment. Now, in Task 3, candidates are not looking at all assessments from Task 1, but they are choosing that one main assessment from Task 1 to analyze student learning. This is very clear, but sometimes our candidates get confused. We have had candidates come to Task 3 and submit all their assessments again from Task 1, when really you only are supposed to submit one assessment and how you will grade that assessment. Now let me say a little bit about focus students, because for Task 3 you will need work samples from your focus students. Most handbooks require 3 focus students. Early childhood handbook requires only 2. But the focus students should represent a range of ability. One of them must have a specific learning need, because you want to look at their work samples and compare focus students and how they did on the assessment with the whole class learning and different groups in the class. You want to write about the learning so that you can determine where you will go next with your teaching and your planning. The handbook is very clear with Task 3, but sometimes our candidates get tired. They don't try as hard. Task 3 is usually the lowest scored rubric of all the tasks. Also, another note, if students have only a hard copy of the handbook and not a digital copy, it is difficult to search the handbook for the answers that you need. So I tell students, please keep a digital copy of your handbook on the computer. If you have questions, you can search keywords in that handbook. If you use just your hard copy, it's difficult to navigate. You might not find the very helpful list that I'm about to show you in the handbook. Here it is. Handbook instructions for Task 3. Assessing student learning. Select one assessment from the learning segment that you will use to evaluate your students' developing knowledge and skills. Attach the assessment used to evaluate student performance to the end of the assessment commentary. So in your writing for Task 3, at the very bottom, you will insert the blank assessment. If it's a graphic organizer for elementary children that they are going to complete, then you put that at the bottom of the assessment commentary. If it's a math test for Math EdTPA, you put the blank math test at the bottom of the commentary. The left side of this list is so clear. Students just need to look at it. The middle column is what they will submit in TK20 as part of their portfolio. They will submit in Part A, student work samples. Part B, evidence of feedback. Part C, assessment commentary. Part D, evaluation criteria. This is a real mix-up, Part D, for students. The evaluation criteria is how that main assessment will be graded. It is not the assessment itself. It is how you will grade it. So if you are grading children in an elementary classroom by a rubric, then you will submit the blank rubric in Part D. If it's a test, you will submit a test key because that shows the scorer how many points students will get. The scorer wants to see how you're going to grade the students, and they want to see work samples of focus students to find out how the focus students actually did. Let's go back over here to the left column. Select 3 student work samples to illustrate your analysis of the patterns of learning within and across learners in the class. At least one of the samples must be from a student with a specific learning need. These 3 students will be your focus students. I'll go ahead and make a note here. Early childhood has more requirements for the students, and they actually have to follow these focus students throughout the learning. So they have to choose at the beginning, and they only have 2 focus students. They have to write anecdotal notes and keep track of these students and submit evidence of learning that they have videoed throughout the learning segment. Okay, back to this left-hand column. Then you're going to summarize the learning of the whole class, referring to the work samples from the 3 focus students. Then you submit feedback. Right here, you write it on the work sample. You submit it in Part B. Then you're going to analyze evidence of students' language use and write about that. You're going to complete your assessment commentary and put it in Part C. Put evaluation criteria in Part D. It's a great page from the handbook. Let's go through the rubrics quickly for Test 3. The key concept of Rubric 11 is analysis of student learning. The candidate will choose one assessment from Task 1 and analyze student learning. They will need 1 score from every student in the classroom. If the classroom is 20 students, they need 20 scores. 3 of those students will be focus students. If they have chosen a small group, as in 4 students as their whole class, then they will have 4 scores, and 3 of those 4 students will be focus students. The candidate must compare whole class analysis to focus student work sample analysis. You can see how the focus students having different levels of ability can help them analyze the class, because the student will have to look at the scores from the low scoring student or maybe the low achieving student and see what their scores are and see how much % of the class made in that range. Then they will look at the mid-range student, focus student, and compare the class to that student score. Then they will look at the high-performing student and do the same. Rubric 12 is highly scored usually. Our candidates do really well giving feedback to students. The feedback must be specific and it must address both strengths and needs. Writing a little smiley face is going to be a 1 on that rubric. They don't want a 1. They want a 3, 4, or 5. They need to be specific. They need to say, I like the way you did so-and-so, and it needs to have something to do with a central focus. A note here. They need to say great job on, and it needs to be about the central focus. Don't say great job on handwriting if they weren't grading handwriting. That's not feedback about the central focus. The feedback must address both strengths and needs. That would be a 4. A 3 on the rubric is just strengths or needs. If they add a strategy, then it's a 5. Like a strategy might be, well, the whole feedback could be, good job on retelling the story on the graphic organizer. I see that you got the sequencing of what happened in the story correct. You included beginning, middle, and end. However, you need to work a little bit on characters and setting. Let's get together and retell another story so that we can work on this. That's the strategy. This needs to be written on the student work sample. Rubric 13. Candidates must describe how the students will understand and use feedback. They must describe how they will support students to understand the feedback. There's a document called Understanding Rubric Level Progressions that students are given. This explains clearly how to pass this rubric. Somehow they don't usually look at that and then they don't pass, but it's fairly easy. You're just going to explain in the commentary writing how you're going to help your student understand the feedback you gave them. Rubric 14. Candidates must analyze students' use of academic language. They must provide evidence of language use. This could be on their work samples, or there are optional video clips that you can submit. You can go back into your video teaching and find students using the academic language, discussing or whatever, and that could be evidence of language use. But the videos in Task 3 are not required, except for early childhood education. They have to have evidence of learning, and that's probably audio or video, and they have to have evidence of vocabulary use. Finally, Rubric 15, using assessment to inform instruction. The candidate must use conclusions from the analysis to propose next steps. So you will look at the scores and you will write about them and you will compare them, and then you will say, I think we really need to do a little more on so-and-so. If there was something that students did not do well on the assessment, then you could continue with that, or you could say it's time to move on to the next content area that would follow this. You must also cite research and theory in this rubric. This concludes Task 3 overview.